Hello, I'm Jessica Langford, and it is an absolute delight to be with you virtually for Campfire. It was a great honour to be invited by Manna to have an opportunity to speak to you all at this event, and I hope you've all been listening in on the other amazing presentations too. It's pretty inspiring to hear all these different perspectives, and I really look forward to sharing mine with you. So I'm here to talk about whether Dr. Maria Montessori would embrace AI if she were alive today to see this new iteration of technology. The short answer, yes, absolutely. I think not only would she be embracing it, but she'd probably be one of the people engineering it. Um, might be a little bit of a short presentation if I stopped there. So I will go on and give a little bit more of an explanation for why and how I've arrived at this answer. Firstly, I think it's really important that we start with a ridiculously quick Montessori 101. We cannot talk about Dr. Maria Montessori without acknowledging her amazing work and giving you a little bit of context around who she is. So in 1907, Dr. Maria Montessori developed the first Casa dei Bambini, the home of children, where she would observe children in a way that drew her to a number of realizations about their capacity, their development, their natural state, and their potential. From those observations, she expressed the Montessori method. So this was how she personally described that process. She didn't talk about developing the Montessori method herself. She said, I have taken what the children have shown me and I have expressed it. And that is what we call the Montessori method. And this is such an important distinction because it really underpins the fact that Montessori as a methodology is around what children need and what they deserve, not what an adult has predetermined that they ought to have. So in the present day, there are at least 150 countries around the world using the Montessori method, more than 15,000 Montessori schools. So this is primary schools and high schools. There are countless more early childhood settings. There are more than we could ever begin to quantify in terms of Montessori homeschoolers or parents and educators who are inspired by Montessori and using some of those principles, even if they wouldn't categorize themselves as using the comprehensive curriculum. So it's had an extraordinary spread and impact on the world of education over the last century and more. So really, what is Montessori? This expression of what the children showed her? Well, it's a set of principles and practices guiding the way that adults interact with children and the perspective that we hold of them, the lens through which we see them. It is also an approach to developing what Maria Montessori called a prepared environment. So it's a view of how the environment acts as a teacher to the child, how the child's engagement with their environment impacts their development. And particularly, there's an emphasis on creating an environment that empowers children to engage in auto-education where they are following their own interests. They're building on their own strengths. They're not dependent on an adult to facilitate their learning. There is also within the Montessori method a scope and sequence of lessons that ranges through a curriculum from birth all the way through to 18. I personally feel like Montessori is a methodology for life because as a currently 37-year-old and counting, I'm still learning about it and I'm still learning from it and through it. But the official curriculum with the corresponding specialized materials, that stops at 18. Even if the method and philosophy continue to inspire us long beyond that. And as I said, there is a catalogue of those specially designed materials. So within that curriculum, many of those lessons relate to particular Montessori materials that are used in classrooms all around the world. In the photograph on this slide, you can see the iconic pink tower. This is often people's first introduction to Montessori materials and often the one that they think of when they're asked to picture something to do with Montessori. That beautiful pink tower comes to mind. It is so much more than some wooden blocks. It is around precision control, the sensory discrimination of descending size, the patience, balance, and self-regulation to create it in form. Even as you can see in this photo, the pincer grip development that happens as you lift each piece from those broader ones with your whole hand right up to the center cube, the units centimeter cubed right at the top. And that also is deliberate. Each of those blocks changes by an increment of 1 centimeter at a time. So you start with that 1 centimeter cubed all the way through to the 10 centimeter by 10 centimeter. So that is also a deliberate introduction of the decimal system. So within this seemingly simple and quite iconic material, there's so many layers of nuance and intent behind it. And it's that amount of subtext and intentionality and mindfulness that I think informs my sense of why Maria Montessori would absolutely be embracing AI today, as I'll explain. But first, I'm going to do a couple of quick disclaimers. I promise I'm getting to the meat very soon, but two quick disclaimers here. One is that for the purpose of this conversation, when I'm talking about my certainty that Dr. Maria Montessori would embrace AI, I want to break that down a little bit. I am certain, absolutely confident, based on the evidence that I'll explain, that Maria Montessori would be completely in favor of AI conceptually when being used by adults for children. So using Manna as an example, in facilitating the observation and documentation that we do as adults for the children in our care, absolutely, I have no doubt that she would be jumping on board with that. When I think about AI use with children, so when you have an adult using it alongside a child in a very intentional and scaffolded way, maybe for research, for something that they're doing together, I do think that, yes, there is a very high possibility that Maria Montessori would be introducing that in an intentional way at the right developmental stage. In my mind, it would be a practical life experience. And she said this herself. She said many years ago, when obviously machinery looked a little bit different, she said, wherever possible, there should be contrivances, mechanical contrivances being introduced for every detail of practical life so that children may be fitted to take part in a civilization entirely based on machines. So she was already recognizing the important role of machinery, mechanics, technology in a child's life. And she saw that in terms of practical life, equipping the child to have the practical skills they need to lead a meaningful, independent life where they contribute to their community, they need to understand how to use the machinery around them. So in the modern day, I think that absolutely applies in the context of AI. So I think she would be looking at it as a practical life experience for children, something important for them to learn. I do think that she would consider it potentially a level of abstraction. In Montessori, we talk about having concrete, hands-on, tangible, physical experiences first, and then taking those experiences to higher levels of abstract conceptual thought. So I think she'd be looking at AI being a way of achieving that outcome of abstraction, but it would certainly follow lots of concrete, hands-on physical experiences. I think it's probably unlikely that it would occur a lot in the 0 to 6 environment because the 0 to 6 period of time from a Montessori perspective has such a strong emphasis on sensory engagement and those practical hands-on experiences, the development of motor movement, muscle memory and control. So I think in that period of a child's life, she would be very cautious and conscientious around when it was used with children. But I am not saying she wouldn't. I'm saying it would be very intentional and very reflective. And that's what I think all of us need to do in our practices at the moment when we're making these decisions about when and how we use AI with children or any technological tool with them. We need to be very mindful and intentional about that. Then, of course, there's AI use by children where, there's no adult involved. This is just independent exploration of an AI technology. Again, I think that's probably more likely that Maria Montessori would be looking at that in the older years, 6 to 12 and beyond, when children are absolutely engaging in broad, abstract, conceptual thought. There'd still be lots of hands-on physical experiences for learning. I don't think there's ever a world in which she would issue all of her physical materials and just get everyone onto an iPad. However, I do think that she would be open-minded to looking for the place of AI use and other technological tools within her classrooms by children if she was alive today. But for the purpose of this conversation, I'm going to focus my argument on AI use by adults for children, because that's where I have the most certainty and clarity. And that's also what we're talking about as practitioners a lot too. A lot of the focus of this conference has been around, decreasing burnout and protecting our educators, making sure that we have the tools to really effectively show up for our children in the best possible way so that we can give them the best outcomes. So I think, really I want to be in the spirit of that when I focus on Dr. Maria Montessori embracing AI by adults for children, as with Manna. My other little disclaimer is all AI is not created equal. So I absolutely believe Maria Montessori would have been an advocate for progress. I also think she would have been a critical consumer. She was that of her time. She looked very critically at what was happening in society around her, what trends were in education, and she was not afraid to disagree. She was not afraid to be a little bit of an disruptor in that market. So I think that the same would apply here. She would absolutely be open to the huge benefits of AI as a technology, but she'd be a really critical consumer of that. So she would have been looking for how to embrace ethical AI for considered purposes. She wouldn't have just been saying, let's do every possible variation of this programming that we can. She would have been doing that with a lot of intentionality. And I think in doing that, she probably would have been looking at the human intent behind the framework of any piece of AI technology that she was using. And that's what I would advocate for everybody to do. I had an amazing reminder this week of the importance of the human beings behind the technology and what their stated mission is in developing the program. When I had representatives from Manna show me an enormous amount of human empathy. I was due to give my presentation on Monday evening. Unfortunately, my own child was very unwell, and while I was madly scrambling trying to figure out alternative care so that he could be looked after while I still gave my presentation, the Manna team behind the scenes figured it out for me and said, you need to be focusing on your little one. Let's rearrange your presentation to another day. Now, what that reinforced for me is that the Manna team fundamentally understand that the most important thing about childcare is the care of the child. And maybe that sounds obvious, but it so often gets lost, particularly when you're working with various platforms and technological tools. Sometimes that fundamental sense that our attention and our presence should be with the child can get overlooked. And so I think when I am making my case, it is really about saying not just Maria Montessori would have wanted absolutely every single possible iteration of AI, but that when she came across something like Manna, she would have been grabbing it with both hands because it is ethically and well developed to make sure that it informs the outcomes that we're all aiming for as educators. So who am I to try to answer this on Maria Montessori's behalf? She's not here to speak for herself, and it's quite a bold thing to do to try to speak for her. So just to give you a little bit of background on me personally and professionally, I was 2 years old when I started attending my mum's Montessori preschool. That centre is named Jescott Montessori because I am Jess and my older brother is Scott. So between the two of us, mum created a portmanteau of Jess and Scott, Jescott Montessori Preschool. I was 17 years old when I returned to that classroom as a teacher. At that point, it was a fairly casual role. I wasn't 100% sure if I wanted to be an educator as my career. In fact, I thought I wanted to be a psychologist, and that's what I started studying at uni. But I very quickly discovered I did not want to spend my lifetime putting people into diagnostic categories. I wanted to spend my life helping people to be psychologically healthy. And I realized the best possible way to do that is to have an influence on them in their early years, where they are building their entire psychological, emotional framework for how they're going to experience the rest of their lives. So I still, to this day, look at early childhood education as a form of preventative psychology, building healthy psychological landscapes. I have been a teacher now, or a Montessori educator and leader for more than 20 years. So it has been an absolute privilege in that time to start out first as a teacher, then move on to being a centre director. And now I'm managing director of all 7 of the SA Montessori centres here in South Australia. So I have this amazing privilege of engaging with leaders and educators at all 7 centres, getting to know children and families, but also cross-pollinating ideas. So taking experiences and insights from one of those 7 centres and being able to help apply it across all 7 so we can all learn with and from each other. I very much believe in moving forward and in progress, not stagnation. Since I think in my whole life, but especially since starting teaching, I've always felt that the most dangerous question, the most dangerous answer in early childhood is to say, this is because it's the way we've always done it. And it comes up a lot. You know, you hear people ask, well, why do we do it this way? Well, we've always done it this way. And that terrifies me. That's a really risky place to be, where you are in a default pattern and where you've lost sight of the reason why. If you can't explain to someone else why you're doing it the way you're doing it, if you don't know that for yourself, there's something that's gone really wrong, and that's where you need to stop and reassess. So I really try to embody that in my professional career, looking for ways to do things differently and to grow and evolve. One of the ways that I've done that recently is that my business partner and I, my mummy and I, opened our first intergenerational site in 2022. So Echoes Montessori is embedded into an intergenerational village featuring the Encore apartments for independent retirement living. So we've got early years education and retirement living above and below, so that we are a fully integrated community living together in an intergenerational setting. Also, important context, in terms of my professional role, I was the person who was previously doing what Manna does for us now. So I was the one getting all of the half-drafted observations that needed to be finished, or the kind of dot points of, oh, I know I want to vaguely say these things, but I'm not sure how to put that into professional terms. And sometimes the opposite, sometimes these just endless sort of diatribes of writing that needed to be condensed down into something that a family could actually engage with in a meaningful way. I was the one getting that documentation. And it has been incredible to me to watch as Manna has taken that over from me and done it way better than I ever was, and certainly 1,000 times faster. And watching the impact that that has had on empowering our educators, because their work in conjunction with Manna as an AI tool allows them to feel, I think, a much greater ownership over it than when they were sending it off to me and getting back sort of my interpretation or my suggestions. I think they feel much more like it is still their own work, and that they're learning from that process as well. So I certainly owe a debt of gratitude to Manna for cutting my workload down. I'm also a massive Montessori nerd. So I've traveled all around the world to visit different Montessori classrooms, go to Montessori congresses. I did my Montessori pilgrimage in 2017 when I visited the site of the original Casa dei Bambini. I went and visited Maria Montessori's study in Amsterdam. I really love all things Montessori, and I care for it very, very deeply. So I hope I'm making a well-informed case for you today about my beliefs of what Maria Montessori would have espoused in relation to AI, because I really have been living this my whole life. So there's that iconic pink tower again. And there's me at age 2 looking very fashionable in my 80s tracksuit. And there's me again in 2017 in Prague at the International Montessori Congress. So I have grown through Montessori, and Montessori has grown with me. So now you understand who I am, but do you know who Maria Montessori is? I talked to you very briefly about the methodology that she expressed from her observations of children. And yes, she is absolutely known for her worldwide contributions to education. As we said earlier, more than 15,000 schools in more than 150 countries. But Maria Montessori really isn't a teacher in a traditional sense. Education was never her ambition. That was not what she intended to do with her life, and it is not what she trained to do. She did not start her career by going to teacher training college, even though that was a very common pathway for women at that time. Let's have a little bit of a closer look at who she actually was. She was a doctor of medicine. That was her training. She went to medical school. She was the first female to go to medical school in Italy, and quite a pioneering thing to do at that time, with a lot of obstacles in her way that she bravely overcame. She was also a scientist, so her medical training, her medical perspective gave her a sense of taking a very scientific approach to her eventual observations of children. She was also a pioneer, she was an innovator, and she was a disruptor. And I think those are elements that can sometimes be overlooked when people are talking about her in a historical sense, but they're so fundamental to not only who she was as a person, but to her mission as a pedagogue, as somebody who has had this incredible influence on the world of education. She was someone who questioned the status quo, who looked for new ways of doing things, who looked for better ways of doing things. She was not afraid of different. She was, in fact, a rebel. In so many senses of the word, but this is somebody who defied a dictator, quite literally. Mussolini tried to order Maria Montessori to make all of her teachers take the fascist oath, and she refused. Now, perhaps now more than ever in the modern world, we can understand the incredible courage that it takes to stand up against somebody who has asserted a great deal of power and is trying to generate compliance in the society over which they hold that power. It is a remarkable thing for somebody to have the individual courage and strength to resist that kind of pressure. Similarly, she used that resistance again because Mussolini was wanting to use education systems to indoctrinate children into military services and principles. Now, at this point in history, Montessori schools were very, very widespread in Italy in particular. That was Maria Montessori's home country when Mussolini was in power. It had been very broadly adopted. There were many Montessori schools and many Montessori teacher training institutes at this stage. Mussolini had been quite an advocate for Montessori, and he tried to leverage his power and that relationship into pressuring Maria Montessori to espouse his principles as well and to effectively follow his expectations. And she didn't. She didn't. Instead, all of her schools were closed, and Maria Montessori was exiled. So this is a woman who not only risked but accepted exile from her home country, from her friends, her family, her career, all of this that she had built. She accepted exile rather than give in to authority, rather than accept that she had to compromise her principles, because she viewed her education method as education for peace. She said that lasting peace is the work of education. All politics can do is keep us out of war. So she viewed education as a pathway to peace, and she was not willing to compromise that. So she was exiled. But this is not someone who gets kicked out of her country and then stops and, feels sorry for herself or feels curtailed and sort of bows down. No, she persisted. Despite having to leave the country, she just went to another country and continued on. And again, this is before we had global connectivity of, technology, making sure we could have instant FaceTime conversations with anyone we missed from back home. She did this with an extraordinary amount of effort and starting anew and using all of her resources to make this happen. So she did that initially in Spain, then the Netherlands. She eventually traveled to India, and she visited places all around the world to spread the message of her method and to advocate for children. So this is really important to think about in context of AI. Dr. Montessori was a rebel. She was somebody who would do what was right, not what was easy or fashionable or expected of her. So I think when we think about AI in the current form that we're experiencing it, there is somewhat of a social kind of hesitation around it, maybe a divide. Some people who can't wait to use it and others who are a little bit scared of it, who aren't sure. Maria Montessori would not be one of the people being scared. That's not in her. She's not someone to shy away from a challenge. She would have confronted it. She would have looked at, okay, how can we do things differently with this? And if she had people saying, oh, no, that's not the way to do things, she would have ignored that instruction, and she would have thought for herself about the role of AI in her classrooms for educators and potentially for children too. So I truly think she would have been making up her own very determined mind, not listening to anybody else's prior assumptions about a technology like AI. Dr. Montessori was also a feminist. This isn't something that necessarily gets highlighted about her, perhaps because there are so many other amazing things to highlight about her that it sort of gets lost in the wash. There's just so many things to admire about her that people don't sort of pick out the one element that she was a campaigner for women's rights, but she absolutely was, partly because she was a campaigner for the rights of all of the oppressed. So she talked about children as being the forgotten citizens, that she felt that it was an injustice that children were not imbued with the same rights and privileges of a society as every other citizen. She felt that the greatness of the human personality begins at the hour of birth. So she felt from the moment a child was born that they deserved to be seen and treated with the same respect as any other citizen. And the same was true for her for women as well. So as I mentioned earlier, she was the first female doctor in Italy, despite the best efforts of her classmates. So she had to overcome a number of obstacles to even arrive in medical school. This was unheard of at the time. So she had, despite having very loving and supportive parents, her father was quite opposed to this seemingly fanciful ambition of hers. So she needed to overcome initially that kind of parental reluctance. She then had to fight to even be accepted into the course because this was unprecedented for a woman to be in the course. Once she was in there, her classmates did everything they could to try to get in the way of her actually achieving the goal of graduating. And my favorite example of this and her ceaseless resilience is what her classmates did in relation to the examinations of cadavers as part of their medical training. So her classmates objected to the idea of having a woman in the room whilst they were dissecting and observing cadavers, because of course the cadavers are naked. So their argument was that it was inappropriate, it was unseemly for there to be shared company, mixed company of males and females in the presence of a nude body. Goodness me. So a ruling was made by the college that therefore Maria Montessori could not be present for the examinations with the other students. She could not perform her autopsies and her medical practice on the cadavers while her classmates were present. And what that meant in real terms was that she couldn't do it during the day. She had to go into the mortuary alone at night to dissect these cadavers. So she did. She did. She went in at night and dissected dead bodies on her own. I mean, what an immensely brave thing to do in so many different ways. Partly just because that would be a very creepy setting to be in, but also because what strength of character it takes to overcome that kind of opposition from your peers, people who are actively working against you, and you take that as fuel to work even harder to achieve your dreams. I just think that is incredible. I just find that so inspiring. Maria Montessori, as she went on after she had graduated, she eventually had a pregnancy resulting in the birth of her son, Mario Montessori. And she made the incredibly difficult decision that she would not raise him. They did end up having a very close relationship. He has carried on her work and her legacy. So they had an incredible bond eventually. But when he was born, she felt that she could not and did not have the opportunity in that society to continue her career and her life's work and her advocacy if she had her child with her, because then the expectation was she was just a mum. She would be at home with that child looking after them. She didn't have the option, like we do now, of balancing our career and our roles as parents. And so she made an immense sacrifice, and one that brought her deep personal discomfort and heartbreak by not raising her son, allowing other people to raise him so that she could continue her work. So again, in thinking about Maria Montessori as a human being, not just this pedagogical figure, you know, she really had to overcome enormous challenges in her personal life so that she could continue campaigning for what she believed that children deserve. And time again, as she did that campaigning, she stood up on global stages in so many countries, in so many settings, and she spoke powerful words in front of powerful men primarily. You know, the most of her audiences, the people with the greatest power, were men sitting there listening to her. And she was changing their minds and changing the world. So Maria Montessori was undoubtedly a feminist, and what better symbol of that than her medical degree here? So in this photograph, this is on the wall in Maria Montessori's study in Amsterdam. And this is one of the hosts pointing to the spot on her degree, where, of course, there was a template that was typed and created ready for the name of the individual graduate to be written in, and the signature of the college dean. So on Maria Montessori's certificate, there is an additional handwritten letter in one spot, because where the template says Signor, Italian for Mr., they had to squeeze in next to that the letter A to turn it into Signora, Miss, for Maria, because of course she was that first female medical student and therefore the first female medical graduate. So she was literally breaking the mold. She was disrupting the template at that point in her life, and that was just at the very beginning of an incredible career. So this is someone who has been rewriting the rule book for many, many years, more than a century. So let's look a little deeper about how each of those aspects of who she is really informs my belief that she would be embracing AI, especially something like manner. So as a medical doctor, medicine is a technology. That's fundamentally what medicine is. It is technological tools that advance over time so that we can keep changing medical practice in response to those improved technologies to give people the best possible outcomes for their health. She studied the pinnacle of the technologies that were available at that time. But why on earth would she have drawn a line in the sand? She would not have said, okay, we've reached the conclusion, it's time to stop. She would have continued moving with the technology. Now, manner as a form of AI is something that absolutely enhances our health and well-being and outcomes for children, because anything that facilitates the effective understanding and expression of a child's needs is helping to take us closer to really fulfilling the best possible outcomes for them in terms of their holistic health and development. I also believe that, Maria Montessori, as a medical doctor, believed in integrated knowledge. She believed in bringing in multi domains and different kinds of concepts to reach conclusions. So you can see this in the way that she went on to study psychiatry, philosophy, anthropology, and put all of those into informing her approach to educational reform. That is fundamentally what AI is. It is a tool that integrates domains of knowledge and discrete pieces of information for us into one place. So Maria Montessori was living that. She was embodying that approach as a human being in her time. I absolutely believe that she just would have had her mind blown by seeing the speed and efficacy with which AI technology can now do that, so that it is more accessible to more people to be able to reach those conclusions with that integrated knowledge. So one of my favorite quotes of Maria's was, "Imagination does not become great until human beings, given the courage and the strength, use it to create." What better expression of human imagination and creativity is there than AI? It is a technology that blows the user away, but at its core, it is a human being's imagination that has developed this technological tool in the first place. So I feel like Maria would be absolutely blown away by it. As a scientist, Dr. Montessori also understood the fundamental value of observation. So she had children in her classroom, but she was treating it like a laboratory. She was looking at the child through a scientific lens, observing them in order to reach an analytical conclusion about their needs and what she could do in response to those needs. And that was something she absolutely underpinned for her teacher training schools, for anyone studying the Montessori method. It is a scientific method that relies upon observation. It is impossible to overstate how fundamental that is to what a Montessori teacher needs to do in order to be an authentic Montessori teacher. We must observe and observe again and continue observing and then observe our observations. Manner, as an AI tool, facilitates observations that are effective and insightful and that undermine that human bias that we can all fall victim to without even realizing. That is such a key tenet of scientific process, is trying to remove the bias from it, trying to have, in scientific procedure, we see, things must be replicable, they must be able to be recreated even by unfriendly others who don't agree with the hypothesis but still come up with the same results. That's sort of the gold standard. Anytime we can reduce human bias and that kind of personal or subjective opinion, we are improving our commitment to science. And that is what manner does for us as well. It removes a degree of the personal human assumption or the conclusions we may jump to, the way that we see the child because of our own projections or past experiences or emotional state. Manner helps to counteract a lot of that, to put different perspectives in front of us for our consideration. It begins and ends with a human being, but there's something in the middle there that encourages us to think differently, that asks questions of us, that makes us address our own assumptions. And that is incredible in terms of reinforcing the scientific methodology of Montessori pedagogy. And it also makes the task of documenting those observations more efficient so the teacher can return to the task of observing. And that's what I think is perhaps the strongest piece of evidence that Maria Montessori would have grabbed the iPad in both hands and downloaded Manner the second she could, because she wanted her teachers in the room observing. She didn't want them intervening too much. She wanted them to try to observe as much as they could, to intervene only when necessary, to step back when the children were ready to be independent. But she wanted that observation occurring because that is what informed the practice. Remember, she says, she has taken what the children have shown her and expressed it. That is what we call the Montessori method. Well, that has to happen over and over and over again in every Montessori classroom. For every Montessori teacher, we need to take what the children give us and we need to express it in order to be true to the Montessori method. So when we're talking about observation, we then need to document that. We have government requirements, we have, authorized officers coming in to assess our practice, we've got families with high expectations. So we do need to document that and make it digestible, to make it available. However, we want to do that as fast as we can so we can get back to the task of meaningful observation and being present with those children. So I absolutely believe Maria would have been rejoicing that there's a technology that allows us to do that. So again, giving her the opportunity to speak for herself, a soundly objective method is based on observation, the observation of facts, which is why the Montessori method is entirely different from all other methods, which came from certain people who arrived at certain theories. So we don't want to be certain people arriving at certain theories with our children. We want to have that come from the observation of facts, and we want to try to remove our certain expectations from that, which Manner helps us to do. I also feel that Maria Montessori's role as an innovator in the world is so important to understanding why she would have embraced AI. She was not content with the status quo. She did not answer the question why with the answer because that's how we've always done things. She looked for ways to improve the world for children, even when that was really confronting to other people or to the establishment at the time. AI provokes people. As I said before, there's kind of two camps, aren't there, of, some people who are so excited about it and see all the potentialities, and others who are, maybe they watch Terminator a few too many times and they're worried about Skynet becoming self-aware. They think that this is the start of the robot uprising. And the truth is that any technological tool can be used and misused in ways that can be damaging to human society, but we don't have to look to AI to imagine that. We can see that in the past and the present. It is not AI that is the problem. It is the way that people use it or the way that human beings program it. So again, coming back to what I said at the beginning about AI is not all created equally, we need to be thinking about the ethics and integrity of the people programming it and the user experience on the other end. But AI can provoke that instinctive reaction in people of fear of change, fear of the unknown. It's disrupting our default way of how we've always done things, and it's making people question their assumptions. But Maria Montessori would not have been intimidated by this. She would not be scared. She would be inspired. She would be excited. And yes, she would be a critical consumer. And yes, she would learn about using the technology effectively, appropriately, and ethically. But if this was a technology she could use to advocate more clearly, to, for instance, translate her lectures in an instant so that more audiences can reach them. Of course, she would be grabbing that with both hands. And she said education should no longer be imparting of knowledge, but must take a new path, seeking the release of human potentialities. And again, I feel that that's what Manna achieves. This is what Maria Montessori was describing as her vision of education. And this is what AI helps all human beings to engage in, is that not imparting knowledge, pumping it into their brains, but allowing them to see the possibilities of human potential, not only their own, but connecting them with a whole worldwide network of prior information, of ideas that they can piece together and create something new. And as a feminist, and I think this is really, really important to touch on, we are talking about, I am talking about early childhood education, where in early childhood, about 92% of the workforce is female. So we are hugely represented in the education sector by women in their career path. We know that Maria Montessori valued her career. She valued her professional commitment so much that she made that ultimate personal sacrifice of not raising her own son. So she would be looking for any opportunity to give modern women opportunities that she didn't have, to make choices, to have both, to have balance, to not have to pick one or the other. So a tool like Manna that relieves pressure from primarily women and releases them from the conflict of having to make their own impossible choices, that is something she would be loudly cheering for. She would be standing at her podium, banging it, talking about how valuable it is to embrace a tool that allows women to do their jobs more effectively and more efficiently, with less burnout, with less psychological and mental energy drained away from doing it. So an AI tool like Manna allows primarily women in early childhood education to achieve their professional goals in a way that encroaches less on their personal lives. That sense of balance, of holistic well-being, and of the rights of women is incredibly important. And it really, truly is something that makes me believe Dr. Montessori would have been a proud advocate for particularly an AI tool like Manna, but looking for other forms of AI that also could offer opportunities like this. Maria Montessori, in her own words, said, "Great evils are not resolved by alleviating a collective error. Take the case of a woman's emancipation. It is not a question of giving women a few more rights, but of recognizing a human personality full of vigor, capable of giving a great and sure contribution to the progress of humanity." So we are talking about a female workforce who are contributing to the progress of humanity. And a tool like Manna AI allows us to do that to the best of our ability. And it allows us to do that in a way that brings the best possible outcomes for children. So absolutely, I think that Maria Montessori would have been delighted by this development. I think it's important, after I've done a lot of talking, to make sure that Dr. Maria Montessori gets the final word herself. The real purpose of education is to prepare the orientation for future generations who will progress to a new plane. What better embodiment of that message than AI as a technology? We are preparing future generations for a new plane of human existence that we can't even necessarily understand or imagine right now. So I truly believe she would be very excited about any tool that allows us a greater understanding and that facilitates that orientation towards a new plane for future generations. That brings me to the end of what I want to share with you. As I've always believed, learning is a journey. It's a lifelong process. It's an adventure that we go on. If you're looking for a travel companion in your own learning journey, particularly if you're wanting to learn more about Montessori practice, or if you're wanting to learn about intergenerational engagement, these are places where you can find out more, or you can get in touch with me so that you can have a travel companion on your own learning journey. So I just want to say thank you again for having me. It has been an absolute privilege, and I hope I've convinced you that Maria Montessori would have passionately embraced AI technology for her educators. And I hope that that's something that you think about doing in your career as well, is embracing the tools that empower you, that release you, that allow you to best express your potentials and put you on the pathway to your new plane. Thank you.